So welcome back, everybody. Yet another installment of Speaking of Seeing with Bill Wadman. Tonight we're going to talk on the theme The Mountain. Hi, Bill.
Hello, how are you, Cindy?
I'm fine. So we find ourselves at yet another screen filled with yet another image. This is one of your images. Why did you send it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can tell you exactly why the person made this photograph.
Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, this is Grand Tetons National Park. There's a visitor center up at the north end of the park. When you come out of Yellowstone, you come down into Grand Tetons and you stop at this center, and there is this giant picture back window there where you come up these stairs and there's this giant window, and that's the view outside. It almost feels like it's a diorama or something because it's just too perfect. And so I just went out back and banged off a couple frames before getting back in the car and continuing south. But why did I send you a picture of the thing? I think you sent me a picture of something and I sent you back a picture of a mountain. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's something about mountains, right?
Yeah, I tell you what I did send to you. I was very curious when I received this in return. I sent you
What was it?
a painting of an Edward Hopper empty room with sunlight. And almost immediately, for people watching, I don't know if you can visualize a Hopper painting of an empty room with some sunlight kind of coming through a window. And then straight away, I get this back from Bill, a mountain. Maybe you were thinking of windows.
I think it could have been that, or I think it could have been that you were so claustrophobically inside with that particular image that I was going the exact opposite. This is the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That I wanted to go the exact opposite of that and say, I'm just going to give you the biggest wide open field with a giant mountain and a blue sky above it.
So you were taking something and being completely contrary about it. That's really what you're saying.
I was trying to get you out of your head.
Wow. So we're at the mountain. I do think mountains are a really interesting topic for us to talk about because so many people, so many artists have approached the kind of the subject matter, a mountain. And I think it's always interesting with mountains how very often they are simply used as a divisive backdrop.
Sure.
But actually, very often, they are so grand and great that artists do occasionally make images that are standalone and about the mountains themselves. So
I think that you can understand when you see mountains like that one in real life, you understand why people thought there were gods at the top of them and that kind of thing. You look at it and you think, oh, there's no way I can go up there. That's not where I'm supposed to be. That's where something better than me exists, So I think that still permeates how everyone sees mountains, regardless of the fact that we've gotten to the top of almost all of them now. You can go ahead.
There definitely is a sense of kind of fairy tale and folklore with mountains. They do conjure, regardless of where they are or when they've been painted or photographed, represented in some way.
Yeah.
There's still always that sense of magic with them, the magic mountain. Which brings us to this one very famous image, of course, reproduced probably, would you say, hundreds of thousands of times, millions of times, this image?
Yeah, this is one of the probably, I don't know, top 5 Ansel Adams photographs of all time, which was taken about 10 miles south of where that other picture that I just took was taken. And actually, funny enough, sent you a picture from that location now because, I guess it's, 80 years on. Oh my God, that's crazy. 80 years later, those trees are all far bigger and you can barely see the river just because it's sort of overrun with brush and trees and stuff, at least from the position that you get to from sort of the parking lot from where this is, because it is sort of a marked place now. Interestingly enough,
do you think that this has become Ansel Adams' landscape then? So when you were there and you were taking these photographs, you were obviously thinking about Ansel Adams or not. What was the case?
Yeah, I mean, I am not much of a landscape photographer. I do it when I'm in particularly gorgeous places. If I'm in a national park and you're at the Grand Canyon or you're at Tetons or you're somewhere, I'll pull out my camera and make what I think are competent photographs, but I am no landscape photographer. As my friend Gary Yost once said, landscape photography isn't taking pictures of the ground, it's taking pictures of weather. Because to take a really great landscape photograph involves waiting for the light to be just right. In this case, the storm going through, the late day sun kind of cracking through these clouds, off to the west there. He obviously set up and was hanging out there for a while waiting for that to happen. And I've just never had the patience for it. But yeah, I think that when you go to these places, you go to, again, the Grand Canyon or this place or what's it called in Yosemite, way up the top, wherever it's called, looking over on Half Dome. It's going to come to me. You go to these places and where these famous photographs have been taken, especially all these Ansel Adams photographs. And that he found the best spot to aim his camera. And you can go there and you can set up your camera. And if the light is right and whatever it is, you can get a gorgeous picture. But a lot of times it feels like taking pictures of a picture in a store window. It's like, yeah, I'm making a photograph, but really I'm just reproducing what's in the store window. So when you go to take these kinds of pictures, you always feel like you're just sort of recreating what Ansel did. At least I do.
But isn't it interesting that you're approaching this as if the photograph makes the place?
Well, I think in some of these places, some of these photographs are so important in art that when you go to that place, you can't help but either see the photograph or think, oh, this looked better in the picture than it does in real life because the light's not as nice today, or there's some artistry, especially Ansel doing a lot of stuff in the dark room to really bring out the drama and contrast in these places. So yeah, I am a collector of places. When I travel we went to Madrid a couple of years ago. I wanted to go because I wanted to go to the Prado and see all, I want to see Las Meninas and all those things. Like I wanted to be able to go look on it with my own eyes, and then I could, in some weird way, check that off of a list in my mind. So I had actually never been to Grand Tetons, even though I had been to Yellowstone before. And so to some extent, just being there and taking a picture there was okay, now I've done that kind of thing for me, as much as it was. I wasn't thinking about, oh, this is where Ansel took this picture, because like I showed you, you almost can't see the river now. It's like, and the river is so much of what makes this picture. If you fill in that river with a bunch more trees, it's a far more ordinary photograph, I think. I think it's the river, and that river only really winds in this one little section. So this is like the place to go. Interestingly enough, when we got there at dawn, I was taking 20-second exposures with my big camera, and my wife pulls up her iPhone with night mode and just goes, and it creates this like incredible picture. There was no light at all. It was still dark. You couldn't even see the mountains, and her little phone. And then some guy drives up, grabs his gear out of his thing and jumps over the barrier and runs down the hill that's sort of in front of you here. I think because he knew there was a better place, 50 yards down the hill to get a better angle. Maybe it's closer to the river. Maybe that's what Ansel did too here. I'm just not that dedicated. But yeah, so anyway, enough of those stories. I also think there's something about these particular mountains are so jagged. They're very fresh mountains. So they're very dramatic in that way. They're not rolling hills. They're thrust up from beneath.
I come back to
like
this
big
idea
teeth coming up.
When you were making this photograph, were you thinking about Ansel Adams? Like, were you making a photograph because Ansel Adams made a similar photograph? Or were you taking a photograph of a beautiful scene that Bill Wadman is looking at?
I'd say 60% of the former, 40% of the latter.
And then
I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to go to these places and take pictures of these things and not compare yourself to Ansel Adams.
I wonder what Ansel Adams would think about that. You know, as somebody who's
I
such
don't
a
know.
keen environmentalist, somebody who really wanted to bring the land to people to show them its beauty, and then to think that kind of 80 years later, I'm sorry to give you a hard time about this, Bill, but I kind of think, you know,
Yeah.
maybe he would feel it was such a waste that rather than coming to see the mountain or to see the river, people are actually just coming to see the Ansel Adams photograph.
I no. Let me clarify then. That's not why I go there. I go there to have the experience, but when I'm taking photographs, I can't help but think about that my photographs are never going to live up to the Ansel Adams photographs, which is largely the reason why I don't bother taking them, because it's just like, these are not good. You know, this is a okay photograph. This is not a exceptional photograph. Um, I like being there and seeing it and having that experience. In fact, a lot of times I'll go to these places and I won't take any pictures at all, and people will come back and they say, "You're a photographer. You didn't take any pictures?" And I'm like, "What is the point?
Mm.
There are a billion amazing pictures of that place made by people who are better at it than I am." You know, it's like when people take pictures of paintings at MoMA. Go downstairs. You can get a postcard. It's going to look a lot better than the picture you just took. Um, yeah, I like being in these places. I don't like working when I'm on vacation a lot of times. So I take the occasional photograph, like that one. It was
Mm.
just too pretty. However, I will say that I see, if you notice, I chose to keep it in color,
Mhm.
where
Color is
if
actually
you turn,
extraordinary, isn't it? The color is really
yeah, well, it really is. But I mean, you could make that black and white and make it far more dramatic in the way that he did. In fact, that export of it was done, I think, on my phone while we were traveling. So I've never spent time with that raw file to try to make something really great out of it. Maybe I'll do that tonight.
Okay. I think this is new to you, this stuff, Brendan
It
Austin.
is.
So just
This
to give
is
you a
this
little
is the one. This is the one that reminded me of the last one that I added right before we started.
okay, so
Sort of like this artificiality to it all.
yeah, so what Brendan Austin does is he goes and he makes photographs of mountains. And I think I may be wrong, but I think he actually also kind of reviews past work and takes out photographs of mountain scenes. So he doesn't necessarily go to photograph mountains, although I think also, yes, he has. These are called Paper Mountain. It's from a series. There's quite a lot of these photographs. And basically what he does is he reprints the mountain onto newsprint paper. So very kind of light gauge paper. And then he actually experiments and plays around with that materiality, that paper form, and recomposes it so that then in a reshoot against a plain background, these kind of new mountainscapes, these landscapes are created, or indeed recreated. So an interesting interplay, I thought, between what actually is and what is for the photograph.
Yeah. There's a photographer, and I apologize for not having this my thought, but what you just said reminded me of this, that I saw one time a series of photographs from the west side of Manhattan looking at Hoboken, New Jersey. And it was light to dark. And then right underneath it, it was light to dark. And they were like identical sets of 10 pictures or whatever it was. And then if you go read the label, the photographer had taken a picture every 10 minutes or whatever at dusk. And that was the top set. And the bottom set was the same picture taken over and over again, just stopping down the lens a little more each time.
Sounds like
Having
something kind
like
of
essentially the same effect.
yeah, something a bit Ed Ruscha about that.
Yeah, it could be.
Hmm.
We'll have to look it up afterwards and find out. But that's sort of where the technique becomes the art in some ways.
Yeah, but I'm
Do,
just going to
do,
read
do
you
you see that?
something that he said about this. So he said the
Sure.
examination of nature and our influence on our surroundings is the foundation of my recent work. Now that's just a very simple artist blurb, but actually there's quite a
Yeah.
lot in that statement. This idea that through examining nature, we almost kind of repurpose it anyway, and I think that kind of conceptually or philosophically links us back to what we were just talking about to do with that Ansel Adams photograph and indeed your photograph in a similar or the same location, which is that when we see landscape or when we look out into the land through the lens of our cameras, are we actually really looking at the landscape, or are we looking through the lens at a landscape that we somehow seek to kind of possess or consume, and actually
Well,
take away from what the landscape is?
I mean, I think that there is a 2D flattening of reality through a lens that certainly when you're talking about something as big and grand as a mountain, I mean, at first blush, you could think that this was a mountain, right? In this photograph, which of course is the whole conceit of the whole thing.
Mm.
But the fact that there is this sort of trick going on here, where you look at it and you go, "Oh, wait a second, there's something else going on here,"
Mm.
is part of the game, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that you can't tell initially whether it's a piece of paper or whether it's a gorgeous mountain, does that diminish mountains or elevate paper?
I'm not sure, but I wonder if the same conceit is also at play when any photographer changes anything at all post-production.
Could be.
This is a manipulation of a paper form in order to represent something that actually the print upon the paper represents anyway. And so really maybe it's just taking out a next procedural step away from actually digitally enhancing or using the darkroom to dodge or burn in a particular area. We're all using these techniques with which to actually alter the truth of what is. I thought it was interesting a moment ago when you were talking about, arriving at that mountain scene, and that perhaps there would be people who come on a day when the weather isn't so nice or when the lighting conditions aren't so beautiful, and they might actually end up being disappointed. I think that's
Sure.
fascinating that we can't maybe bring ourselves to accept like the actuality of something. Instead, we're kind of caught in this loop, maybe as artists, where we must seek to, if not beautify, but then certainly bend things to our way.
Well, I think to some extent, I think one of my sort of problems, quote unquote problems, is very, very, very in quotes, bad word problems with landscape photography is that a lot of times it almost feels like it's the equivalent of a, highly retouched shot of a model that's been done up.
Mm.
It's like this is not really, this is a perfected version of what the reality of this place is, because you were there at exactly the right time with exactly the right gear and maybe did stuff in post and whatever, that this is so polished that it kind of takes away the reality. Now, there are a handful of places that you go to where I think the Grand Canyon is one, or and Yosemite are one of those, two of those places where you go, and even when it's bad, it's still pretty good. It's still tragically impressive. And then if the light does turn in a certain way, you do have that magic moment, which is even better than any photograph you ever saw, because the reality in front of the photographer when he was there at that exact moment is even better than what he captured. In this case, it's interesting because it's like, yeah, you have a photograph of a mountain printed on a piece of paper, which would have been a mountain if you just put it, but then he's crumpling the paper to be a mountain. So it's like, it's 3 levels deep.
Mm. There's a really lovely thing that the legendary Don McCullin said. Now, he's obviously most famous for being a war photographer, and I know that's actually a title that he rather resents or rallies against. But
I have his autobiography on next to my bedside table right now.
So he most recently has been taking landscape photographs in the Somerset Levels near his home here in England. And there's a really excellent, very short film that he made in collaboration with Dunhill. And if anybody wants to watch that or look that up, I would really recommend it. And he speaks about his landscape photographs right at the end as a kind of counterpoint to the horrors of war, because of
Yeah.
the sense that he describes it as going into a supermarket and filling one's trolley and being able to leave without paying. Like there's no sense of having to ask permission. There's no sense maybe even of morality. Again, I find that very interesting when essentially tasked with this photographing of the land, recreating it for other people or bringing it to other people for them to see, that the photographer should feel so powerfully pleased with the sense that they can just do with it what they want, they can take from it. Now, in McCullen's case, he's not talking about it in a negative way at all. I mean, this is actually him speaking with relief and release about now photographing this glorious land, no matter how desolate he might make it look to those of us who also equate it with some of his earlier war photographs. The fact is that the sense of someone like McCullen going out into the land, making photographs that he doesn't have to ask permission for, there's something at once really moving about that. It also tells a lot, I think, about those of us who are very used to making photographs as being almost fatigued by the sense we owe something to our photographs. Whereas the land doesn't ask that of us. The mountain doesn't ask that of us.
It's interesting. I had never really thought about it that way. There is a little bit of a tragedy of the commons thing going on with landscape photography. If you take it from the negative point of view, which I know you say that that's not what he means, but when you said that, when you described it that way, I kind of thought, yeah, who are you to take a picture of this place that we're all supposed to be enjoying? You know, but that by recording it, you're diminishing it.
Well, that's also coming back to, again, these first images we were looking at. You know, you go to a place, you arrive there, Bill Wadman, famed and esteemed photographer, my friend, and you make a photograph that's really a homage to another photographer. And much as you're telling me that you go to the place to experience the place, that nonetheless, as soon as you put that camera to your eye, you are seeing through the lens of not just yourself as a photographer, but then also the photographer who's already been there.
Well, I think that there's two reasons for that. One, honestly, I think I took maybe 20 pictures of those mountains over the course of 3 days that we were there. But on top of it, I'm not a good landscape photographer. So part of that is just a self-deprecating thing of I am not good enough at
Can you
this
please
to
put
create
comments
something
in the
new.
chat? Everybody watching, could you go to the chat now and just add a comment? Is Bill a good landscape photographer? What do we think? Should we give
Please
him
don't
marks?
judge it on that one. You know, I'm surprised you didn't put in the picture I sent you of the Snake River spot where I actually did take a picture there. Because that's actually very much exactly like Ansel would have, this place where Ansel took his. But I mean, I just don't. It's similar to occasionally I'll take a picture on the street and somebody will say, "Oh, I really like your street photography." It's like I've taken 40 pictures on the street that I've ever liked in 20, you know, in 15 years of taking pictures. I don't think I'm particularly good at it. I don't have the eye for it. I don't have the patience. I don't carry a camera around with me all the time. It's not what I'm trying to do. It's like I swim freestyle and it's trying to do the butterfly. You know, it's just not how I go. So in some ways, when I do have a camera and I am in a beautiful place, I feel obligated in the sense that I am a photographer who does have the equipment and does have the skill to be able to take a technically correct photograph of the space. But I very rarely come away with something that I think is, I don't think that it's rare that I feel like I'm saying something new. And part of it is that there's, you know, we've discussed this before where, you know, especially with my portraits and stuff, I'm trying to imbue some of me onto my subject, and the relationship I'm having with the subject somehow comes across in the photograph, and I can control lighting and I can do all of these things. With landscape photography, it's sort of, you get what you get. You know what I mean? Like you have in front of you what you have in front of you. You could turn your camera, change your exposure, but that's it. You know, you can't tell the mountain to move a little bit to the left and rotate a little bit because the light would look better across their chin that way.
I'm not sure if you're baiting me or not, because, you know, I'm going to talk anyway about landscape photography. This could apply to architectural photography. And actually, I think it could apply to the photographs we make of people.
Okay.
You know, we all have almost like a set repertoire. We have a catalogue of skills. We understand
Sure.
the processes we can use. I wonder if there, you know, would be a landscape photographer who would ever think that the landscape is unchanging.
I think the landscape is changing. I don't think that you can change it.
Do you think you can change your models?
No, but I think that it is soft clay that I can push and pull in small ways. Yeah. I mean, my job in some ways is to manipulate my subjects. Not with malice or negatively, but like that's why the picture that I take of something or someone is different than the picture that you take of them.
But equally, do
Or
you
Joe
think,
Schmo or
you know, do you
go ahead.
think we could go to this location again?
Yep.
We stand there, would we take exactly the same photograph?
No, it would never look the same because the world had changed around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I didn't do that. Time did that. I just happened to be there in 2 different days.
I don't know if
I'm
we
not
have
saying the
time to
landscape
talk
doesn't
about that.
change. I'm just saying that I can't control it changing or how it changes.
Very interesting. I mean, this is the
What's the
late
next one?
arrival. This is the thing that you put in very awkwardly at the last minute. When I showed you the slides just before we started and I came to this one, you immediately said, oh, I can think of this. This is somebody I really value and really rate. Hugh
Yeah,
Kretschmer.
so
Invisible
Hugh
Barrier.
is, I know Hugh from the Eddie Adams workshops in upstate New York that I am part of the black team on for the past few years. And Hugh comes up and ends up running the teams and giving talks and whatever it is. And he and I have gotten to know each other. And he came down as actually one of my subjects for my 365 in 2018. I think he came over, it was. In fact, he stood right where I'm standing right now or sitting right now. And so he went out to this mountain. God, I feel terrible not knowing what mountain this is. This could be Mount Whitney for all I know. I'm terrible at that kind of thing. Went out to this mountain, photographed the mountain, went home and had it printed onto a fence, and then went back out and put the fence up and then lined it up and took this picture. So in some ways, it's very similar to the last one in some ways, right? Where we're taking something natural and he's I mean, the title Invisible Barrier, I think he's imagining it as a weird where the fence ends up being just a clear thing that you're looking through and you can't see, invisible barrier. But there's also this deeper idea of like, we can take this beautiful mountain and I can manufacture it, and at first glance it looks like it's just a mountain and you don't even realize that actually you're just looking at some boards of wood or plastic in front of the mountain because I've replicated the mountain on the fence. I just thought he's very clever when he does these sort of manipulations in real life. The funny thing is I look at this and I think, give me a couple hours and I could recreate something like this very believably in post. And Hugh doesn't do that, which I give him mad props for. I'm just too lazy to actually go do things practically. Plus it's really expensive and time consuming. What do you think of this one?
I want to know why, of course. I want to know why he should title it Invisible Barrier. I mean, I think it's right to say that actually we didn't know the title of it and we were scrabbling around before we started trying to find the title. I can't remember what we gave it. We gave our own title to it, didn't we, before we found
Mountains, fence. Yeah,
Mountain
you said
thing.
something. You said mountain fence.
Yeah, so very original. But
Yeah.
This is a case actually in which the title really does make something of the image that the image doesn't already. One, because it kind of qualifies it in some way. It helps reveal actually something of it, which is maybe an irony in itself. of course, it's a neat trick, but it's the same trick that people use when they go to the Leaning Tower of Pisa,
Sure.
you know. And I just think, mm, I would want to know more background. I think this is the kind of work for me where I would probably really enjoy digging around about it and finding out a lot of context. I don't feel that I need to do that in the other images. In actual fact, I don't actually even feel I need to do that in this image. And I suspect that's because through the repurposing of material, which I think is still quite obvious, though nonetheless, of course, the title really helps along with the understanding of it. There's still a quality of maybe beauty that's purely aesthetic to this that I don't necessarily find in that one. But again, this is very, very subjective. This is just me looking.
It is interesting. It is interesting though that if I had made this image and I had made it in post, right? If I sort of created this in Photoshop, the fact that he actually did it, does that give points to the image for you, or is how an image was made doesn't add to it at all? You know what I mean? How
No, I
difficult
think
it was for somebody to make it, give it points, you know?
it has its own particular craft. Of
Yeah.
course, you know, you go somewhere, you make a photograph, you have the thoughtfulness or the insight to say, well, actually, I want to describe how maybe we meet nature and we don't actually ever get any purchase on it. That is me, however, projecting my interpretation on it. So I'm projecting my interpretation in order to give credence to the value of the process. Now, until I
Or
find out whether that is actually the intention of the artist, or indeed if there is a similar intention or an intention that I simply don't know about yet is nonetheless interesting, I'm kind of on the fence, about this.
I I know, I agree. You know, I also wonder, I don't know how deep his sort of intentions were with this. You know, is it just an optical illusion for him, or is he trying to make some statement about society and how we trick
Yeah,
ourselves into thinking we haven't put up fences around everything, and you know, by putting these
yeah.
illusions in that, like, I don't know if he was going that deep or not, or whether he just thought it was a neat idea and he made it, you know, made it happen.
No, I'm sure there is some kind of comment, some kind of cultural comment in this. The fact that it's a fence rather than just a giant sheet of flat surface, whatever. The fact that
Yeah.
he's made a point of it being a fence. I'm sure there must be some reason for that. Um, but what I find interesting then again as a comparison is that you know, the photograph itself, you know, are we actually looking at the mountain? What are we doing?
Yeah.
You know, where is the divisible point between our appreciation of a form, our understanding of an object or a space, our appreciation of something that's just about human cleverness?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much this is about human cleverness. I mean, you know, Ansel Adams, celebrated photographer, as we were saying early on, possibly one of the most reproduced photographs in the world. Certainly in
Yeah.
the top five of all Ansel Adams photographs.
Yeah.
Instantly recognizable. In fact, sadly, it's become so recognizable and perhaps overused in a way that means that, you know, you see it hanging in your doctor's surgery as a print. You know, you could be in a municipal
It,
building somewhere and it'll be framed. It's almost become like wallpaper, sadly, because it is a fantastically rich photograph. But I have to say that in this image, I'm looking, yes, at the river, and I agree with you. Without that river there, perhaps the photograph wouldn't have the same draw to it. But nonetheless, I'm still so interested in that mountain. That is a mythic mountain.
I will tell you, have you been to Grand Tetons? It is, you know, I've been to, you know, 30 national parks or whatever it is. I've been to most of the big ones multiple times.
Have you got a back?
I it, have I what?
I've been to here 30 times. And you can put
Yeah.
Bill Wadman on it.
No, I'm saying that only to say that, like, when we got there, I instantly said, this is in my top five. Like, I had no idea how beautiful this park would be. And the park is really just these flatlands, this plain going up to these giant mountains. Like,
Mm.
that's it. That's like the whole park is just basically this view. Um, and totally stands up to scrutiny.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, I mean, it really is something. You also got to wonder, I mean, how do you feel about paintings of mountains? Do you think that photographs of mountains do just as much justice? My mother right now is stuck in Thailand, and they've gone there each year for a few months, and then a couple of years ago they had to leave for a few days because of visa reasons to come back, whatever the rules were. And they flew to Nepal and then flew to Kathmandu, up to Lukla airport in the mountains, and then took a helicopter from there and went to this place called, Hotel Everest View or something like that, where out my mother's window at 14,000 feet is Mount Everest. It was like, this is Mount Everest, and this is my mother's view out of her window. And I think to myself, like, I'm not saying I will never, but like, it is highly likely that my mother has seen something that I will never see with my own eyes, right? You know what I mean? Because she was there. Now, my mother's not an artist or a poet in any sort of traditional sense. But like, if you sent somebody there to go paint Mount Everest and then you went and saw Mount Everest, like, are mountains one of those things that are always going to be better in real life just because the sheer scale of it can't be contained in a print or in a canvas?
I don't know, because we could think about things like the Caspar David Friedrich painting where the man stands atop the mountain and looks across the range.
Sure.
And there is a very powerful sense of high elevation, a sense of thoughtfulness and quietude, and looking at that landscape.
Sure, but that has as much to do with the guy up there, right? I mean, like, if you plopped the viewer in that spot, wouldn't it be even like more crazy?
Yes. And I do wonder why then, as artists, we're constantly looking to reproduce these things.
It's the best we've got. Have you been to the top of Ben Nevis?
I've not been to Ben Nevis. The only Ben I've gotten to the top of is Ben Lomond, which is still a mountain, but it's a Scottish mountain. So, it's manageable for even unskilled walkers. There is something, again, this magic of the mountain, this idea of, being high up like a bird in an eyrie. It is magic. Yeah, I come back to the question, like, why as artists are we constantly seeking to try and, I guess we're trying to capture that magic, aren't we? And do we ever?
We're trying to recreate something that's way bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, which is why maybe in some ways work like this has an element of authenticity to it that perhaps direct representations don't.
Because it's bringing the mountains down to our scale?
Maybe, but also it's actually being more truthful in so many ways, because it is an obvious lie. And that actually, through the fabricating of a fabrication, we are actually told the story of like the human relationship to nature, to the mountain. I'm just wondering about, are we passive when we're looking at these images? When I look at your photograph, do I enter, this is about, again, entering a space of an image. We talked about this when we talked about Helga and Daydream. I'm entering that space. I'm standing on that plane. I'm looking at that mountain. And I realize the mountain for myself through the photograph. But from what you say, I actually ought not to do that. Because even though it's a direct representation, how can it ever possibly convey to me what it felt like for you actually to see it and be there? Whereas when we come to something
it's a poor analog,
So, but when we come to something like this, though we don't have a natural representation, perhaps we do still get a sense that we are relating to a form that is somehow significant to us, and that through its deceit, like the lie reveals itself, and so actually we can simply understand the point of what we're seeing. Whereas when we see photographs like this or with the Adams, maybe we're actually not getting the point of what we should be actually seeing. We should be there.
Yes, but not all of us can be there. I would say that I personally would rather have the representation that aspires to contain greatness rather than something that just is one-to-one.
Conspires to contain greatness.
Inspires, yeah. It just, I want aspires rather. It's like I want the thing that's trying to put God in a bottle rather than having just a bottle of Coke. Even if the thing in the bottle is definitely not God. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Like that effort to try is worth something to me.
I just always find it so interesting when I speak to you that we can be looking at the same thing and we like each other and we're friends, and yet we have such totally opposing ideas about this. Like, I'm listening to what you're saying and I can feel myself rising up with kind of horror at, God in a bottle.
Sure.
Containing magic. Like, what are you trying to do, Bill?
Well, that's the thing. It's not possible. It's an impossibility. But that in knowing that you are creating an imperfect representation, you're trying to create a less imperfect representation. I mean, like, oh, by the way, Glacier Point is the place in Yosemite that I was trying to come up with. If you stand on Glacier Point in Yosemite at dawn or something, and you're looking down on the valley and you're looking over at Half Dome and you're just thinking to yourself, I am not a religious person, but you can understand why this is like a natural cathedral. This place is, this place looks St. Peter's, feel like my living room. And
yet we want to put it on a postcard. We want to put it on a postcard, stamp it, and send it to our friends. Isn't this a strange aspect of human behavior? We're doing this all the time, obviously, in so many other ways through social media platforms and so on.
But that's precisely why I don't feel like there is much value in trying to photograph these things for real for me, because I'm not going to do a good job. Now, you could be like Brendan Austin and say, well, I'm going to take that thing and I'm going to bring it down to my size and I'm going to create something out of it. It's like, this is a neat trick and an optical illusion, but it doesn't say anything to me.
See, I don't agree at all. I think that
it's like one step too clever.
Well, no, I think that about this. But
I think about it as, were you going to put up Hughes?
In this one, I think this is somebody being really smart, and it devalues the whole process for me. Whereas, although this is smart, you're talking about it in a kind of diminutive sense. So you are bringing it down by suggesting that it brings something down to our level. Whereas actually, what I see with it is something that's actually quite humble, which is that there's nothing grand about this. I went and printed this on a fence panel. It costs a lot of money. I've realigned it. My own ego is so much within this work. Sorry, Hugh Kretschmer. Don't tell him I said that.
We're going to get him on your show. He's going to tell you what's what.
Yeah. But with this one, with Brendan Austin, it's a real sense of humility. He's not trying to make out to us that he is anything other than with the mountain. I don't feel like he's trying to command the mountain.
He's not with the mountain at all.
Well,
he's
this is with the mountain.
He's making a poor imitation of the mountain.
That's the point.
I know, but then, what is the point of that? Why not just go to the mountain? Like, why have those middle two steps? What do they give us?
Because much as any, I think, right-minded human would see this photograph or your photograph and would say, wow, that's such a beautiful place. Wouldn't it be fantastic to be there? You actually kind of said it yourself when you said, we aren't there. We're looking at a postcard. Yep. I wonder, I'm really absolutely not messing with the legacy of Ansel Adams here at all, by the way.
Come on, do it, Sandy, do it.
But what I mean is that, this is absolutely not Ansel Adams' intention. Of course, you probably didn't realize that 80 years on, I described it as wallpaper. That's not what I think of the actual photograph, by the way. But actually, through the frequent revisiting of the same images, we become so overused to them. But actually, really what we want is we want to be there. What is this doing to us? Whereas, I don't want to be there, but I can still understand the magic of the mountain through it. And that's why I come back to this idea about truth through representation and what we're looking at. I know that this is a representation, it's an approximation, but it probably does look like the thing itself if I was there. This doesn't, because it doesn't exist. And therefore, there's almost like a different kind of purchase on not just reality, but also how I interact with that and how I also see this thing, the mountain. It can be what I want it to be, yes, but more than that, there's an element of truthfulness to it when I think about how I can't be there. So there's an honesty in that, like I can't be there, but I can appreciate.
Because this doesn't really exist.
I can appreciate what the mountain means.
It feels like this is another example of like where we come at it from two different places. I look at this and I see this is a maybe he should talk to his therapist power struggle about trying to contain and have power over the things he can't possibly have power over. Like
you're the one who just said God in a bottle. What more is there about containing?
Yeah, but I assume in that sense that I'm going to fail or Ansel's going to fail. Brendan is saying like that thing, I can't possibly have control over the real thing. So basically I'm going to have control over paper mache. And this isn't paper mache, but you get my point. And I'm going to create that thing as if I myself am God. See, that's the angle at which I come at it. I think this is clever in a similar way that I think Hugh's shot is clever, which is that it's like there is a visual trick, a conceit that's happening here, and you can buy into it and you can find meaning in it, but ultimately they both kind of feel a little bit like a optical illusion parlor trick to me. I don't find truth in it. And I'm not saying that there isn't value in that from the like, oh, that's clever. Those are quite clever images to me. And they're really neat, but I don't look at them and find solace in my soul through them. Because they're ultimately representations of something that is there and can be amazing and you can experience yourself. All right, painting, Paul Cezanne.
Well, that wasn't the smooth segue I was hoping for.
No, I want to see where you're going with the painting.
Well, you kind of already mentioned it. Painters are making of things what they will. Yeah. My argument always is, of course, that photographers are making of things what they will. Anyone even seeing, we're constantly adjusting our expectations of what things are and what things look like, so they fit our worldview, really. Anyway, this is one of many paintings Cezanne painted of Mont Sainte-Victoire near Aix-en-Provence.
Obviously, really a very interpretive painting of a mountain.
Yes. This period, this 1895, really kick-started what is considered to be his later period, so leading up to the end of his life. that he, I've used the word legend already, he really was a mythic character for so many of the big names of 20th century art. He's classed as a post-impressionist. And his work, you can, for many people would say that you can see the beginnings of Cubism actually in the way he applies paint to surface, all that kind of technical paint stuff. But in terms of looking at a mountain, he lived here. He looked at this scene over and over again. I mean, there's 30 plus paintings of this mountain. It's something that really fascinated him in its totemic nature. Also because we earlier mentioned this idea that, or certainly I was talking about the fact that mountains are often just backdrop. Mm-hmm. Whereas for Cezanne, the mountain was everything. I think
that, certainly it dominates the town beneath it,
Yes, but also do you think that when you look at the town and you see how, again, color is used, that they are seen as one?
Yeah, I definitely think that his representation of a mountain, especially in this case, is all about the colors of the mountain more than it is the form of the mountain.
This is a very
especially that face. Look at those oranges and yellows and umbers and like all those kinds of colors in there of like a late day sun hitting that mountain.
Yeah, I really feel a kind of south of France warmth to the mountain. I'm not sure what time of year this was painted at actually, but I in many ways that of course would have impacted the quality of light he was looking at the mountain in. But I feel so much about this mountain through this painting. So the austerity that I see when I look at the mountain in the Ansel Adams photograph, or in your photograph of the same mountain from a slightly different angle, I don't get the same sense of austerity. I get the sense of the greatness, but nothing about this seems cold or rejecting of me.
Yeah. I think that part of that has to do with the kind of mountain it is. I think if you could go down to the Appalachian Mountains in here in America and find some hills that are not aggressive rock outcrops. You know what I mean? There's more. They're weathered. It seems like they've seen time. For that kind of thing.
Well, maybe that's also then very much about, you asked me about going and climbing Ben Nevis, for example.
Yeah.
I said, no, I haven't climbed Ben Nevis, but certainly some of the smaller Munros, like Ben Lomond is the obvious one on the banks of Loch Lomond, very, very similar sort of feeling to it. And so I've always felt, it sounds like such a twee word to use, but very fond of Cezanne's painting of this mountain. Maybe because there is a sense of familiarity. It's not grand and jagged in the same way you have described or seen.
Yeah.
But it still has this wonderful sense of an overarch. It's a welcoming mountain. And also I'm projecting onto it what I know about it and what I know about how other artists thought of Cezanne. All of that is seen through this mountain. It becomes emblematic actually of who Cezanne maybe is. So, Cezanne is the towering mountain in the minds of Picasso. In fact, Picasso bought his chateau on the other side of the mountain so he could kind of look at it. He could look at the mountain that Cezanne painted because he was so indebted, or he felt so indebted to what Cezanne had given him as an artist, this sense that one could look at a form and it was of a beauty that didn't have to be just what the naked eye could see. Or indeed,
Cezanne didn't know any of that at the time.
No, but he was very fortunate. He had a lot of time to devote to painting. He was left a large estate. He grew up in this area. He knew this area well. He wasn't an incomer in that sense. He's very familiar with this landscape, was afforded the luxury of painting over a long period of time where he didn't have the same kind of financial constraints we might think of when we think of impoverished artists in their garret.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, you know what, we should do that as one of our next compare and contrasts of artists who came from rich families who never had to work versus artists who scraped by and barely survived, and to see if their art differs because of that.
I was looking at, there's a lovely painting by Van Gogh of a mountain. It's like a wheat field leading up to a mountain. Very, very similar color palette to this, of course, the very rich ochres and the yellow tones. Yeah, maybe we should do that, Bill. Rich and poor.
I mean, even from a photographic point of view, you know, you have people like Eggleston who, you know, were born into rich families and never really worked a day in their lives. And it's like, well, he sees photography and music and all these things very differently than somebody who had to do them to survive. You know, it's a completely different perspective. I don't know. Yeah, we can do that. It's funny, you know, you said the thing about Cubism and stuff. We go back 1 second. The building in the lower center, the way the shadow is on the wall from that building, the way it ends up being very geometric in a way that will become more of a thing, you know, 10 years later.
Yeah, and actually in the later paintings of the mountain by Cezanne, you can obviously also then start seeing again even further flattening out on the face of the mountain through like slightly bigger or broader panels of color.
Yeah.
But I think that this kind of painting is an ode to the mountain. Yes, it's an ode. Now we look back through the tunnel of time when we say it's an ode to, you know, the birth of everything modern in art. But, you know, as you said, Cezanne didn't know that, maybe.
Right.
Instead, he was just awestruck by the beauty of something. And he wanted to, in some way, I guess, preserve that and bring that to us as an audience.
What's the last one?
Last one. Fuji-san. Hokusai. Again, many, many versions of this, different weather conditions. This one, more colloquial, is known as the Red Mountain for obvious reasons. I mean, even in Hokusai's wave, you know, the giant wave, we can see Fuji in the background. But in an image like this, the mountain really is the entirety of what we're looking at. Obviously, the sky plays an important part. It balances out visually that heavy red. I always think of this very much as a flag. It's a flag, waving a flag of something that's.
It's funny, these volcanic mountains like Fuji, you know, they also in real life look really like Mount Fuji is one of those things you see in real life and you think, wow, that's actually Mount Fuji, and it looks just like they said it would. You know what I mean? It's one of those like things where you're like, wow, that's exactly how it looks. Look, it's a weird volcano in the distance, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like representations of this kind of stuff are interesting in that way. It's so strange that he chose to make it red.
But when we look at this, I don't know how you feel, but you know, are we interpreting this as something that's an austere mountain? Is this a friendly mountain? Is this a Moana-esque mountain of friendliness? Or is this actually rejecting us as humans? Is it saying
I think it's rejecting life, period.
Okay. Why do you think you
Why, you disagree?
That? No, I'm interested why you think that.
Because it's devoid of trees, because it's red. You know, it's funny, and like, this is going to sound a little weird. Does it look a lot like a nipple with milk coming out of it if you look at it too long?
Maybe that's just you, Bill.
You don't see that at all?
It's quite a pointy boob, if that's the case.
That's what it happens, you know. Anyway,
Anyway, trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think's down there at the bottom?
Yeah, but they stop like right at the bottom. Obviously, like they're not going up the mountain. That could be because of elevation. I mean, that's a thing that happens, but it could also be because that's an active volcano.
Hmm.
And
So do you think the red is there to remind us that it's alive and it's going to burn us?
Yeah, it's got magma inside.
But you were just saying, or I was certainly saying, how warm and friendly this kind of is a bit of a Moana mountain for me. I think it's going to reach its giant arms out and embrace me any second. That's the feeling I get from it because of the kind of warmer colors. But here we are looking at red, and you think it's like hellfire. It's going to burn us.
Well, first of all, it is a volcano. Secondly, I think that a red is very different than an ochre. This is a blue sky. This is not sunset where the sun is hitting at a certain thing. He made a decision to have a very off-putting, stark, barren volcano painted red dominating most of the piece.
And
I think there is a statement being made.
Look at the title, Fine Wind, Clear Morning. That title suggests to me that all is good in the world.
I think that it suggests that all is the way the world is, not necessarily all is good. You give a morality to it. Just because it's a fine wind and a clear morning doesn't mean that it's all good. It's just, it is the way it is, and I'm recording it as such. You go to Mount St. Helens, well, now it just looks like a big, giant, blown up mountain. But like all those mountains, they look like this, and then they go off like a 1 megaton nuclear bomb, Sorry, helicopter coming this way. Can you hear that?
There was one here.
I find it interesting that, there was. I find it interesting that every time we do one of these, one of the last pictures you pull up is always like a very flat Japanese representation of whatever it is we're talking about. Never an African piece or an Indian piece. If you wanted to like go outside of European art, it's interesting that you tend towards Japanese.
I just think this is such an iconic, it's an iconic mountain, and it appears obviously so many times, different iterations of it in Hokusai's work. It is an unforgiving mountain, and yet it stands benign for huge amounts of time. Obviously, we arrive in Tokyo, you see it, you look out the window, you see it, you don't get away from Mount Fuji. It really is quite extraordinary. Also because it's in a landscape that never really seems to support it. You've got the giant metropolis, and then you have this mountain. It seems like the most incongruous mountain in the world, and yet it's actually Tokyo that's the most incongruous city. And yet none of it feels like that. It all feels as if it's entirely obvious when you're there. But in the Hokusai images of Mount Fuji, I always think that there's, again, this sense of quiet, which is why when you say about the red and it's very almost like a violence, I don't see that in this at all.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that there is a serenity to like the fact that, as far as I know, Fuji has been dormant for a long, long time. I think that there's an understanding in a painting like this that is just because we have such a limited sense of time as humans who live for 100 years or less. That he understands what's really going on there.
I wonder though,
by the way, did you know that
these, across all of these paintings, is there a sense of serenity? Because mountains, no matter how giant they are, in their command of our space. It reminds it's not really our space. And that because of that, we can like give ourselves up into the knowledge that we're just these tiny little insignificant things in the face of something so ancient, so giant, and so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think insignificance is the word that I always end up using when I talk about big nature like this. It scares me a little bit. It's like, it's for the same way that some people are scared about being in the city, I'm scared of really wide open spaces of nothingness like this. Because, people think, oh, that's beautiful. And then I think, oh my God, if you put me here and I didn't have food or water and there wasn't a visitor center right behind me, what the hell would I do? Because I'm going to freeze to death tonight. Like that's the way that I think about it. So it's a healthy respect that I have. I don't romanticize mountains. I have a very healthy respect for them.
And I, of course, completely romanticize mountains.
You romanticize everything.
Everything. Anyway, Bill, we're back at the beginning. Thank you very much for joining me again this evening.
Thank you. This is fun as always.
Watch this space for Rich and Poor coming up soon.